September 3rd, 1939. London, England. The telegram arrived at exactly 11:15 a.m. with three simple words that would change medical history forever. Start bleeding. With those words, Dr. Janet Vaughan launched the most ambitious medical project of World War II, transforming milk bottles into life-saving blood banks and ice cream vans into mobile hospitals. But the woman who would save tens of thousands of lives during the Blitz had started her career facing a much different reputation among her medical colleagues, who questioned whether a woman should be handling blood at all. They whispered behind her back in hospital corridors. They questioned her methods when she experimented with pigeons because she was denied access to patients. They called her unconventional, reckless, even inappropriate for a lady doctor. Some colleagues, uncomfortable with a woman who spent her days drawing blood and studying its mysteries, made cruel jokes about her work. But the woman they underestimated would revolutionize emergency medicine and prove that innovation, not tradition, saves lives when catastrophe strikes. This is the story of how Dr. Janet Vaughan overcame prejudice, skepticism, and institutional resistance to create Britain's first national blood transfusion service. How she transformed from an outsider fighting for recognition into the medical visionary whose makeshift blood banks would save an entire army. How the woman who was once dismissed for being too unconventional became the architect of modern emergency medicine and the savior of London during its darkest hour. To understand the magnitude of what Janet Vaughan accomplished, you must first understand how catastrophically unprepared Britain was for the medical crisis that World War II would bring. In 1939, London's entire blood supply consisted of 8 pints stored in a single location. The British medical establishment operated on the principle of blood on the hoof, believing that donors would simply appear when needed, that volunteers could be summoned during emergencies, and that immediate transfusion was the only viable approach to blood medicine. This wasn't ignorance. This was institutional inertia. The British medical hierarchy, dominated by male physicians trained in traditional methods, had convinced themselves that blood could not be stored safely, that large-scale collection was impossible, and that emergency medicine should focus on treating wounds rather than preventing blood loss. They had spent years planning for every aspect of wartime medical care, except the one thing that would matter most: having enough blood to save the wounded. Janet Maria Vaughan had been fighting this mindset her entire career. Born October 18, 1899, to a privileged family in Bristol, she seemed destined for a conventional life as an educated wife and mother. Her father was the headmaster of rugby school. Her mother was a close friend of Virginia Woolf. The family expected Janet to receive a gentleman's education, marry well, and contribute to society through charitable works rather than professional achievement. But Janet Vaughan had other plans. Despite being told by her headmistress that she was too stupid to be educated, she read voraciously, studied relentlessly, and took the entrance exam for Oxford University. She failed twice. Most young women of her era would have accepted defeat and embraced the domestic life their families expected. Janet took the exam a third time and passed. At Somerville College, Oxford, she studied medicine under legendary professors Charles Sherrington and J.B.S. Haldane, graduating with first-class honors in 1922. But her real education began when she moved to London for clinical training at University College Hospital, where she was assigned to work in the city's most impoverished neighborhoods. In the slums of 1920s London, Janet encountered medical problems that textbooks never described. Children dying from anemia caused by malnutrition, workers suffering from blood disorders linked to industrial pollution, mothers weakened by repeated pregnancies and inadequate nutrition. The connection between poverty, nutrition, and blood health became the foundation of her life's work. Her 1934 book, The Anemias, was one of the first comprehensive studies of blood diseases and revolutionized understanding of how environmental factors affected blood chemistry. But writing about blood disorders and treating them were two different challenges. As a woman physician in the 1930s, Janet faced constant barriers to clinical practice. When she received a research fellowship to Harvard University, She was denied access to patients because of her gender. She was also denied access to laboratory mice for her experiments. Determined to continue her research, she adapted her methods and conducted groundbreaking studies using pigeons, developing new understanding of vitamin B12's role in blood formation. Her colleagues found this unconventional approach amusing, but her pigeon studies produced results that traditional research methods had missed. The prejudice Janet faced wasn't subtle. Medical journals questioned whether women had the steady nerves necessary for blood work. Hospital administrators worried that female physicians might faint at the sight of blood or prove too emotional when dealing with dying patients. Some colleagues suggested that women doctors should limit themselves to pediatrics or family medicine, leaving serious specialties like hematology to men. But Janet's work in the London slums had given her something her critics lacked: practical experience with blood disorders under emergency conditions. She had learned to make rapid diagnoses with limited equipment, to improvise treatments when standard medicines weren't available, and to save lives when time and resources were scarce. These skills would prove invaluable when war transformed blood medicine from academic specialty to emergency necessity. In 1937, as war clouds gathered over Europe, Janet began developing plans for emergency blood transfusion services. Her inspiration came from Dr. Frederic Duran-Jorda, a Catalan physician who had pioneered mobile blood collection during the Spanish Civil War. Duran-Jorda had demonstrated that blood could be collected, stored, and transported to frontline medical stations using converted vehicles and improvised equipment. Janet proposed adapting these techniques for civilian emergency medicine. She calculated that London air raids would produce between 37,000 and 57,000 casualties per weekend, with approximately 10% requiring immediate blood transfusion. Meeting this demand would require storing thousands of units of blood in advance and developing systems for rapid distribution during emergencies. When Janet presented her proposals to British medical authorities, the response was immediate dismissal. Senior physicians argued that large-scale blood storage was impossible, that donors couldn't be recruited in sufficient numbers, and that civilian emergency services should focus on trauma surgery rather than blood replacement. Some questioned whether a woman physician could understand the logistical challenges of wartime medicine. Undeterred, Janet approached the dean of her medical school and requested £100 to develop blood storage techniques. With this modest funding, she assembled a team of colleagues in her London flat and began experimenting with blood collection, storage, and transportation. They developed improvised transfusion equipment using rubber tubing, corks, and clips. They recruited volunteer donors and established protocols for blood typing and compatibility testing. The technical challenges were enormous. Blood spoils rapidly without proper preservation. It requires specific mixtures of sodium citrate and glucose to prevent clotting. It must be stored at precise temperatures to maintain viability. Transportation without refrigeration causes contamination. Every aspect of blood banking required innovation because no established systems existed. The scientific obstacles seemed insurmountable to traditional medical thinking. Blood cells begin deteriorating within hours of collection unless properly preserved. The delicate balance of anticoagulants must prevent clotting without damaging blood components. Storage temperatures must remain constant to avoid hemolysis, the destruction of red blood cells that renders blood useless for transfusion. Even minor contamination could kill patients rather than save them. Janet's team approached these challenges with systematic experimentation that bordered on obsession. They tested dozens of preservative combinations, measuring cell viability over time under different storage conditions. They experimented with various container materials, discovering that certain glass compositions maintained blood quality better than others. They developed sterilization procedures that eliminated contamination without damaging blood chemistry. The breakthrough came when they realized that blood preservation required thinking beyond traditional laboratory methods. Instead of perfect laboratory conditions, they needed robust systems that would work under emergency circumstances. Their modified milk bottles became marvels of practical engineering, designed for easy handling by medical personnel under stress. The bottles included color coding systems for blood types, expiration dating that prevented use of deteriorated blood, and standardized volumes that simplified dosage calculations. Converting ice cream vans into mobile blood banks required equally innovative thinking. The refrigeration systems needed modification to maintain precise temperatures, while vehicles traveled over bombed roads. Storage compartments required cushioning to prevent bottle breakage during emergency transport. Loading and unloading procedures had to work efficiently even during blackout conditions when normal lighting was impossible. Janet's team solved these problems through relentless experimentation. They modified milk bottles to create sterile storage containers, developing what became known as MRC bottles, or Janet Vaughn bottles. They converted ice cream vans into mobile refrigeration units. They established protocols for donor screening, blood typing, and quality control that ensured stored blood remained safe and effective. In April 1939, Janet convened the first meeting of the Emergency Blood Transfusion Service in her flat. The assembled doctors and pathologists developed comprehensive plans for London's blood supply during wartime. They calculated that each depot would need approximately 9,000 units of blood, preferably type O universal donor blood. They designed networks of collection centers, storage facilities, and distribution routes that could serve London's 8 million residents during emergency conditions. When Janet submitted these plans to Professor William Topley of the Medical Research Council, she tripled her budget estimates on the advice of a colleague who understood government bureaucracy. The plans were accepted, the funding approved, and Janet was appointed director of the Northwestern Depot in Slough. On September 3, 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, the Emergency Blood Transfusion Service received its activation order. Start bleeding. What followed was the most intensive medical mobilization in British history. Within hours of the war declaration, blood collection centers opened throughout London. Volunteers lined up to donate blood for storage in depots located north and south of the Thames. Ice cream vans converted to mobile blood banks began distributing supplies to hospitals and emergency medical stations. The system worked perfectly from the first day. During the early months of the war, when air raids were expected but hadn't yet materialized, the blood service continued expanding its capacity and refining its procedures. By the time the Blitz began in September 1940, London's blood banks contained enough stored blood to treat thousands of casualties simultaneously. The true test came during the London Blitz, when German bombers attacked the city for 57 consecutive nights. The casualties were staggering. Approximately 30,000 civilians died during the Blitz, with hundreds of thousands more wounded by bombs, collapsing buildings, and fires. Without the emergency blood transfusion service, the death toll would have been catastrophically higher. Janet's blood banks saved lives on an unprecedented scale. Hospital emergency rooms, overwhelmed with casualties from nightly air raids, could treat severe trauma cases immediately because blood was available on demand. Ambulance crews carried blood supplies to bombed buildings where victims lay trapped under rubble. Mobile medical teams brought transfusion equipment directly to disaster sites, saving people who would have died during transport to hospitals. The psychological impact was as important as the medical benefit. Londoners knew that if they were wounded during air raids, blood would be available to save their lives. Civil defense workers knew that help would reach trapped victims. Medical personnel could focus on treating injuries rather than searching for donors during emergencies. The blood service provided a foundation of confidence that helped London survive its darkest period. But Janet's innovations extended far beyond London. The British Army Blood Transfusion Service, modeled on her civilian system, provided blood supplies for military hospitals throughout Europe and North Africa. Mobile blood banks accompanied invasion forces during D-Day, ensuring that wounded soldiers received immediate treatment on the beaches of Normandy. Field hospitals carried portable blood storage equipment that kept transfusion supplies viable under combat conditions. The strategic impact was enormous. Before blood banking, military medical services focused on evacuation, moving wounded soldiers to rear-area hospitals where treatment was possible. Janet's innovations made frontline treatment feasible, reducing evacuation requirements and returning wounded soldiers to duty faster. Military commanders credited blood transfusion services with maintaining combat effectiveness during prolonged campaigns. Other nations studied British blood banking techniques and adapted them for their own military and civilian needs. The United States expanded its Red Cross blood services based on British models. Soviet medical services developed mobile blood collection systems for the Eastern Front. Even German military medical services grudgingly adopted blood storage techniques pioneered by Janet's team. The scale of the operation was staggering. During the war, British blood services collected over 1 million units of blood from volunteer donors. The Emergency Blood Transfusion Service distributed supplies to hundreds of hospitals, thousands of medical stations, and countless emergency situations. Mobile blood banks traveled millions of miles delivering life-saving supplies throughout Britain and occupied Europe. Janet herself went beyond blood banking to tackle other medical challenges. In 1945, she was sent to Belgium to study starvation among liberated prisoners of war, developing protocols for treating severe malnutrition. When Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated, Janet led a medical research council team to research feeding strategies for surviving inmates. Her work at Belsen represented medical science under the most extreme conditions. She described the experience as practicing science in hell, trying to develop evidence-based treatments for people who had survived unimaginable horrors. The survivors were so traumatized that they screamed, "Nicht crematorium," when medical staff approached with syringes, fearing they would be killed with lethal injections, as had happened during Nazi medical experiments. The medical challenges at Belsen were unlike anything Janet had encountered, even during the Blitz. The 60,000 surviving inmates were in various stages of starvation, disease, and psychological trauma. Traditional medical approaches proved useless because the survivors' bodies had adapted to extreme deprivation in ways that normal medicine couldn't address. Feeding programs that worked for injured civilians proved deadly for people whose digestive systems had shut down from prolonged starvation. Janet had arrived with plans to conduct rigorous scientific trials of protein hydrolysates, concentrated amino acid preparations that theoretically could be absorbed faster than normal food. She brought extensive research protocols, measurement systems, and statistical analysis methods. But the reality of Belsen made academic medicine seem irrelevant and even cruel. The survivors couldn't tolerate normal food. Rich rations designed for healthy soldiers caused severe digestive distress that often proved fatal. The psychological trauma was as dangerous as the physical starvation because many inmates refused treatment, convinced that medical intervention meant death. Janet realized that healing these people required completely rethinking medical practice. Working with medical students who had volunteered for the humanitarian mission, Janet developed feeding protocols based on careful observation rather than theoretical knowledge. They started with minimal quantities of easily digestible foods, gradually increasing nutrition as survivors' bodies readjusted to normal metabolism. They learned to approach patients slowly and gently, earning trust before attempting medical intervention. The emotional toll was devastating. Janet wrote to colleagues that watching people die from starvation while possessing medical knowledge that seemed useless was the most frustrating experience of her career. But gradually, the feeding protocols began working. Survivors gained weight, regained strength, and started responding to medical treatment. The systematic approach Janet developed at Belsen became the foundation for treating mass starvation that influenced humanitarian medicine for decades. Janet adapted her research methods to these horrific circumstances, developing feeding protocols that saved thousands of concentration camp survivors. Her work at Belsen led to new understanding of starvation physiology and recovery nutrition that influenced emergency medical practice for decades afterward. After the war, Janet continued her medical career as principal of Somerville College, Oxford, while conducting research on radiation effects and bone metabolism. Her students included future Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and future Cabinet Minister Shirley Williams. She served on the Royal Commission on Equal Pay, helped establish the Nuffield Foundation, and continued her research until retiring in 1967. The honors came eventually. Janet was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1957. Oxford University awarded her an honorary doctorate in 1967. She was elected Fellow of the Royal Society in 1979, at age 80, recognition of her lifetime contributions to medical science. But the true measure of Janet's achievement was the transformation of emergency medicine that her work represented. Before the war, medical services responded to emergencies by improvising treatments with available resources. After the war, emergency medicine became a planned, systematic response to predictable medical challenges. Blood banking expanded from Janet's wartime innovation into a permanent feature of medical infrastructure. Every modern hospital maintains blood supplies for emergency use. Blood collection services operate continuously, ensuring that donated blood is available when needed. Mobile blood banks serve remote areas and disaster zones. Blood banking has become so routine that most people never consider the revolutionary thinking that made it possible. The techniques Janet developed during World War II influenced every aspect of emergency medicine. Systematic planning for mass casualty events became standard practice. Mobile medical services brought treatment to disaster sites rather than waiting for victims to reach hospitals. Stockpiling medical supplies in advance of emergencies reduced response time when minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Modern emergency medical services trace their origins directly to Janet's innovations during the Blitz. Paramedics carry blood products and transfusion equipment. Trauma centers maintain massive blood inventories. Disaster response teams deploy mobile medical facilities that can treat hundreds of casualties simultaneously. The systematic approach to emergency medicine that saves lives today began with Janet's milk bottles and ice cream vans during the London Blitz. The broader impact extended to medical education and women's roles in medicine. Janet's success demonstrated that innovation came from challenging established practices rather than following traditional methods. Her emphasis on practical problem-solving over theoretical knowledge influenced medical training for generations. Most importantly, her achievements proved that gender was irrelevant to medical competence and leadership. The transformation of medical education was profound and lasting. Before Janet's innovations, medical schools emphasized theoretical knowledge and rote memorization of established procedures. Students learned to follow protocols developed by previous generations of physicians, with little encouragement to question existing methods or develop new approaches. Janet's success during the war demonstrated that practical innovation could save more lives than perfect adherence to traditional practices. Medical schools began incorporating problem-solving methodologies into their curricula. Students learned to analyze medical challenges systematically, develop testable hypotheses, and implement solutions under real-world constraints. The case study method, which examined successful innovations like Janet's blood banking system, became a standard teaching tool that helped future physicians understand how medical progress actually occurred. Women's advancement in medicine accelerated dramatically after Janet's wartime achievements. Before the war, female physicians faced systematic exclusion from leadership positions, specialized training programs, and research opportunities. Many medical schools maintained quotas limiting female enrollment. Hospitals routinely assigned women doctors to pediatrics or family medicine while reserving surgery and specialized fields for men. Janet's success shattered these barriers by demonstrating that medical innovation required intelligence, determination, and practical skills, rather than physical strength or masculine authority. Her leadership of the emergency blood transfusion service proved that women could manage complex medical operations under extreme pressure. Her research achievements showed that female physicians could make fundamental contributions to medical science. The statistical evidence was overwhelming. During the war, women physicians achieved success rates equal to or better than their male colleagues in every measurable category. Female medical students consistently earned high marks in clinical training programs. Women doctors demonstrated exceptional competence in emergency medicine, trauma surgery, and specialized fields previously considered unsuitable for women. By the time Janet died in 1993 at age 93, the medical profession she had entered as an unwelcome outsider had been transformed. Women physicians were no longer curiosities, but leaders in every medical specialty. Blood banking had evolved from desperate wartime improvisation to sophisticated medical technology. Emergency medicine had become a systematic science based on evidence and preparation, rather than luck and heroism. The woman who once faced whispers and skepticism for her unconventional methods had revolutionized medical practice and saved countless lives. The colleagues who questioned whether a woman should be handling blood had witnessed the transformation of emergency medicine through her innovations. The critics who suggested she stick to traditional female medical roles had seen her create entirely new fields of medical practice. Today, every person who receives a blood transfusion benefits from Janet Vaughn's innovations. Every emergency room that treats trauma patients uses systems she developed. Every blood bank that stores donated blood operates according to principles she established. Every mobile medical unit that responds to disasters follows procedures she pioneered. Janet Vaughn's story reminds us that medical progress comes from challenging conventional wisdom, that innovation requires courage to face criticism, and that the greatest advances often come from the most unlikely sources. The woman who was once dismissed as too unconventional became the architect of modern emergency medicine. The outsider who faced prejudice and skepticism created systems that save lives every day. In the end, Janet Vaughn proved that saving lives matters more than following traditions, that practical solutions trump theoretical objections, and that determination can overcome any obstacle. She transformed blood from a medical mystery into a life-saving tool, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary innovations come from the most unexpected places, created by people who refuse to accept that things cannot be changed. During the darkest days of World War II, when London faced nightly bombing and thousands of civilians lay wounded in the streets, Janet Vaughn's makeshift blood banks stood between life and death. Her ice cream vans and milk bottles, ridiculed by medical traditionalists, became the foundation of emergency medicine that continues saving lives 8 decades later. The woman they once doubted had indeed saved an entire army, and in doing so, changed medicine forever. In 1939, Dr. Janet Vaughn launched a vital medical project during World War II, transforming milk bottles into blood banks and ice cream vans into mobile hospitals. Despite facing prejudice for being a woman in medicine, she revolutionized emergency medicine and created Britain's first national blood transfusion service. Britain was woefully unprepared for the war's medical crisis, with only 8 pints of blood available in London. The medical establishment believed donors would appear on demand, and large-scale storage was impossible. Vaughan, born in 1899, defied expectations to study medicine at Oxford, then witnessed the devastating link between poverty, nutrition, and blood health in London slums. Her 1934 book, The Anemias, was groundbreaking, but as a woman, she faced barriers in clinical practice and research. Undeterred, she innovated with pigeon studies, revealing new understandings of vitamin B12. She also gained crucial experience treating blood disorders in emergency conditions, skills that proved invaluable for wartime. Inspired by Dr. Frederick Durand Jorda's mobile blood collection during the Spanish Civil War, Vaughan proposed a similar system for London, anticipating thousands of casualties. Her proposals were initially dismissed, but with modest funding, she developed innovative blood storage techniques in her flat. Her team engineered MRC bottles from milk bottles and converted ice cream vans into mobile refrigeration units, establishing protocols for donor screening and quality control. In April 1939, Vaughan convened the first meeting of the Emergency Blood Transfusion Service, planning a network of collection centers and distribution routes for London. Her plans were approved, and she was appointed director of the Northwestern Depot. On September 3, 1939, with Britain's declaration of war, the service was activated. Start bleeding. The system worked flawlessly, with collection centers opening immediately. By the time the Blitz began in September 1940, London's blood banks had enough blood to treat thousands. Vaughan's blood banks saved countless lives during the Blitz, providing immediate treatment and instilling confidence. Her innovations extended to the British Army, influencing military medical services and being adopted by other nations. After the war, Vaughan researched starvation among liberated prisoners of war, including at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. There, she developed feeding protocols for survivors, adapting her scientific methods to extreme conditions and influencing humanitarian medicine for decades. She continued her career as principal of Somerville College, Oxford, and was recognized for her contributions, including being made Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire and elected Fellow of the Royal Society. Vaughan's work transformed emergency medicine from improvisation to a planned, systematic response. Blood banking became a permanent medical infrastructure, influencing every aspect of modern emergency services, from paramedics to disaster response. Her success also shattered barriers for women in medicine, proving that intelligence and determination, not gender, were key to medical competence. By her death in 1993, the medical profession she entered as an outsider had been fundamentally transformed. Every blood transfusion, every emergency room, and every mobile medical unit today benefits from Janet Vaughan's innovations, proving that challenging conventional wisdom and practical solutions can overcome any obstacle, saving countless lives.